A lot of the time, for the sake of simplicity, we analyze Splatoon as if it's a two-dimensional game. We look at overhead views on planning maps and VOD reviews, and we draw our X's and our dotted lines on the map to show how we should be positioning. But it's important to remember that there are a lot of elements of the game's mechanics that operate in 3 dimensions, and not all of these are going to be apparent from that perspective. One specific case of this that I haven't seen mentioned very often is the shape of certain hitboxes, especially bombs, booyah bombs, and tri-strikes. Bombs and booyahs are spheres, while tri-strikes are cylinders. And here's why that matters. A tri-strike works well when it's understood two-dimensionally from a bird's eye view. That circle on the map is what it's going to hit, floor to ceiling. It doesn't matter how high or low you are with regard to it, only whether you're inside the circle or not. It forces you to move horizontally. Bombs and booyahs, in some niche cases, actually don't necessarily require that. Take a look at these clips here. I'm lining up with my toe on the line of the floor here to get exactly the same distance from the bomb. In this clip, I get splatted by the bomb. In this clip, I don't. That's because the bomb hitbox is spherical, or at least a semi-sphere in this case, because half of the sphere is just getting blocked by the floor. That means you miss some nuance about what it's doing in 2 dimensions from an overhead view. If I jump, I may not be moving away from the bomb from an overhead perspective, but I'm putting myself further away from its center point, which is where the explosion comes from, meaning I'm getting further away from that explosion. At this particular distance, that's enough to make the difference between whether the bomb splats me or whether I just take indirect damage from it. In tight spots, knowing this about the hitbox can mean the difference between whether you're splatted or whether you can stay in play, both for sub-weapon bombs and the outer edge of booyah bombs. It's also important to remember this when grates are involved, because an explosion happening above you can still hit you if you're not careful. Suction bombing the underside of grates can make the bomb harder to see, but since its center point is pretty close to where it would be if you'd thrown it on top of the grate, it often catches players off guard. There's another implication of spherical hitboxes that's important to understand for booyah bomb placement. It's a common error for players to throw booyah bombs onto small platforms that are high up in the air. While this will force the player on that high ground to drop off, and that can sometimes be worth it, it's also very unlikely to splat them, and it won't paint very much at all. The roughly circular shape that a booyah bomb paints on the ground is going to be a different size depending on how close the ground is to the center of the bomb, where it lands initially. If it's thrown at the ground on a flat stretch where there's a lot of that ground around it, the circle that's painted has the same radius as the booyah bomb itself. It's max range, it's max paint output. But if it lands higher up, a lot of that larger circle is wasted because it only has a small amount of turf to paint. And the part of the booyah bomb that reaches down to the ground will be way smaller, if it even reaches the ground at all. Look at how little paint this booyah bomb actually leaves on the ground from a bird's eye view. It looks way bigger while it's detonating, but because of its placement, this is all it's going to leave behind. This makes it really easy for a player standing on top of that platform to avoid the booyah bomb. They can just swim off the side, and even just as they fall to the ground, they're moving further away from the booyah bomb. And they're probably not falling straight down, but moving away from it at the same time in the air. It's a lot more survivable in these situations than it looks. What's often more dangerous is actually throwing the booyah bomb at the wall underneath the platform. That way, the part making contact with the ground is larger, and it'll still clear the top of the platform. Also, because the booyah bomb didn't get thrown directly at the top of the platform in full view of the opponent, but underneath it, or to the side of it, it's a little more difficult for a player on top to see where it went, and sometimes it can surprise people by coming up through the floor all of a sudden. Tune in next time on Squid Math for our discussion of 4-dimensional hypercubes and their role in the mechanism by which Inklings and Octolings respawn after being splatted.